Representative Frieman, House Bill 118. Yes. Representative Fondo, I want to recognize, give the vice chair of our committee a point of personal privilege before you begin your bill, if you don't mind.
Personal privilege, people in the audience. It's just the ability for a legislator to say, just share any thoughts they may have outside of the context of speaking to, for or against a bill. We have to go on the floor later this evening. I would prefer that all of you guys who are here with us today to give testimony would not have to come back when we finish the floor at 6 o'clock. If we don't finish bills before we go on the floor, this committee will recess probably until 6 or 7. In the interest of trying to make sure you guys don't have to spend the night here with us, I would ask that, and of course it's only an ask. It's not anything but an ask. I would ask that if you have new information, we have a number of bills that are very similar. If you have additional information that you would like to see provided, certainly I think it's appropriate that you come to the table. If it's just repeating for the next few bills, the same testimony that we heard, we have heard it. So again, if you would like to speak, I'm not trying to convince you not to, but if it's a repeat of the testimony that we've already heard, just prudence, so that unless you do want to come back and spend the evening with us. So that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Representative Frieman, you've been patient. Thank you, sir. House Bill 118.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that being allowed to go. Members, thank you for allowing me to present House Bill 118. House Bill 118 has been called and is named the Louisiana Firearms Protection Act. This bill, and I want to be sure we're all clear, this bill does not grant any further rights to Louisiana citizens than we already have. This bill is designed to protect the rights we already have. So we're not granting any new rights, but we're trying to protect the rights we already have. And how does that work? There's 7 states, I believe, currently that have passed a similar law. And the reason I brought this bill is because over the last 20 years or so, I've been seeing a lot of things coming out of Washington to trying to regulate and gun bans and all the different things they're doing that's infringing upon our Second Amendment rights. And states have now taken the position that under the 10th Amendment, they're going to have to start protecting their own rights. And this is what this bill is designed to do. What it says is that it... And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I do have some amendments that I'd like to go ahead and put into
I'll offer those up, and I'll let Attorney Becknell explain the amendments. I'll read them in.
This is Amendment Set 1720, and what this set of amendments do, it's make technical changes. It specifies that law-abiding citizens shall not be construed to include anyone who is not legally present in the U.S. or the state of Louisiana. And it provides that all federal acts, laws, executive orders, administrative orders, court rules, and regulations enacted after January 1st, 2021 shall be held invalid and of no effect in this state.
If I may, on the amendment, Mr. Chairman, the purpose of that amendment is I had spoken to the Concealed Carry Department of the State Police, and they were concerned that the way the bill was written, it seemed to indicate that we would follow no current federal law at all, and they thought that would put the state police concealed carry in a position that would be detrimental. So in deference to the state police, I wanted to make sure the law was clear that we're not talking about anything that's currently in existence. We're talking about future laws, executive orders, and so forth. So that's the reason for that amendment.
Okay. I've offered up that amendment. Any objection to the adoption of the amendment? Hearing none, the amendment is adopted on the amended bill.
Again, this bill does, it basically says that if the federal government issues a executive order, a law, any type of regulation that comes out of Washington that in any way infringes upon our Second Amendment rights under our Second Amendment of the Constitution and our state constitution, that the state, parish, and local law enforcement agencies are precluded from enforcing those laws against the citizens of the state. Now, let's make sure we also understand that this bill does not prevent the federal government from enforcing their own laws. They can send in the marshals, they can send in the FBI, they can send in whoever they want from the federal government to enforce their own laws. It's just preventing the state, parish, and local law enforcement from enforcing them. As we all know, there are a number of sheriffs and police forces around the state that really don't want to infringe upon the folks' Second Amendment rights, and this bill helps them and gives them the cover they need not to do it. There's also some teeth in the bill that if any agency violates this bill, they can be sued civilly, as well as the person who violated it. So if you have a sheriff that comes out and enforces a law that they shouldn't be, or if law enforcement officer does it, there is a civil remedy that we can exercise and sue that particular entity and get civil damages. So the law would not be, it would really be symbolic at best if there was no teeth in it, and this puts some teeth in the law. Mr. Chairman, I think that's really the gist of the bill. I'd be willing to take any questions.
Thank you. Representative Marcel.
Thank you, Representative. So basically, if we pass this law, it's going to say that if the federal government passes a law regarding guns, that it would not apply to Louisiana, that we can make our own laws and just forget about what the federal government said, correct?
No, not exactly, Representative Marcel. What this bill says is that if the federal government does pass a law that affects us in Louisiana and every other state, it just prevents the local state, parish, and local officials from enforcing it. Federal law could still enforce it.
Right. But you're saying that state police couldn't enforce it, sheriff couldn't enforce it, and the city police could not enforce a law that's handed down to us federally, right?
Correct.
Correct.
If it affects our Second Amendment rights, it acts as a chilling effect on our ability to keep and bear arms.
Okay. So what if the federal government passed that law and said if you're not willing, law enforcement, Louisiana state, city police, and sheriffs are not willing to enforce those laws, that they could somehow stop funding for many of the funds that come down federally to our state, that would impact law enforcement overall. What do you foresee that happening, sir?
Well, I guess it's possible, but there's also some case law out there that has said that the federal government is not allowed to tie federal funds to certain actions or inactions by a state. So that can be litigated. There is no definitive answer on that. But at some point, Representative Marcel, I think a state has to decide, are we going to just accept money and do whatever we're told to do? Or is there a right or a wrong response? And I think at some point we have to stand up for our constitutional rights, and if the federal government starts infringing upon them, we have to make that decision.
And so it's your testimony that not only just this law, the federal government, you do know that requires us to do things federally throughout the laws. And so we're going to abide by those, but we're just going to pick this one out because of our Second Amendment right. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I think I'd be very happy to join 7 other states that have agreed to do that as well.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be sure.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your questions.
You understand that we may lose federal funding to our
Yes, ma'am.
state.
Yes, ma'am.
And if people are willing to do that, thank you.
Thank you.
So to that respect, so can we properly label this as a potential defund the police bill? Don't answer that. Don't answer that. Don't answer.
I'm not gonna answer that.
I've been being good all day. I've been itching to say something crazy. I'm sorry. Don't answer that. Representative Seabaugh. Representative Seabaugh, on your question.
Representative Frieman, thank you for bringing this bill. I know we talked about this a little bit before this committee hearing today, and I just, one of the things you mentioned was the 10th Amendment, and that's something that is, I think, forgotten a lot in it's a lot of the things that come out of Washington. And is this bill an intention, or is one of the driving forces behind this a reassertion of the 10th Amendment?
Yes, it is, Representative Seabaugh, and we've seen over the last probably 10 years is where states are really starting to reassert themselves under the 10th Amendment. And, it's important for us as a state and all states to maintain its sovereignty as well as its union. And this is one of the things we're trying to do under that Second Amendment is assert that 10th Amendment right and protect ourselves. The states are really realizing they have to start protecting themselves from federal overreach.
Well, thank you for bringing the bill, and at the appropriate time, I'd like to move favorable.
Thank you, Representative Seabaugh. Representative Bacala.
Thank you. Real quick, I think this bill is brought, I think, because of the current political environment in Washington, where we're hearing that through executive order, our president may be trying to ban 20-round magazines, 12-round magazines. He may be trying to ban certain classes of weapons unilaterally that are not law, but he's trying to utilize regulation to create violations of crime. Can you expand upon that idea? Or it's been published. That's what the president would like to do, use executive authority to limit firearms rights. And I think that's probably the target here.
Yes, Representative Bacala, what we've seen in probably federal and state government at times is the overuse of executive orders. And unfortunately, what's not being able to get through Congress and passed as a law in its proper process they're using executive orders to do things that are infringing upon folks' rights. And this is another example. So yes, I'm not going to say that this wasn't part of the problem that I saw. And that's what the other states have seen, and it's all kind of going forward through that rhetoric that's coming out, and it's really scary to folks to realize that we can lose certain rights by the stroke of a pen, not through the proper process of passing laws and issuing, those types of things under the proper process. So yes, that is a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Representative Marino.
Thank you. I'm just trying to walk through it to understand what actually happens if we pass this. Right now, we have courts that determine whether things are or are not infringements in our state, correct?
Yes, the courts do determine. You're talking about constitutionality issues and so forth?
Right. I mean, if someone wants to challenge a law saying it's an infringement on your Second Amendment rights, they can take that to court.
They could.
But this bill says you're not going to court because the legislature is saying all of this shall be considered an infringement, and then it goes through A1, A2, A3, A4, and it's very, very broad. So you're eliminating the court process on reviewing anything that has to do with all the list in your bill.
No, I would disagree with you, Representative Marino. It still allows court challenges. I mean, it does not nullify the enforcement of a federal law by the federal government. It just tells us as a state level, a local level, we are not going to enforce it against our citizens. But it still gives the right to challenge it in court on the constitutionality issue.
I'm just trying to understand it. So your bill says that the following federal laws and it shall be considered infringements on the right to keep and bear arms, and like one of the things says any act forbidding possession, ownership, or use or transfer of a gun by law-abiding citizens. So the state can't make any law forbidding the possession, ownership, or transfer of a firearm by a law-abiding citizen?
Can the state make a law?
Yes.
Yes, they can. That's under the 10th Amendment. They have the right to regulate and do things they want. If the legislature decides to make a law here, I guess we could, yes.
But if the federal government passes a law on possession, ownership, or transfer, this gives the state the ability to say, we're not following that.
We're not going to enforce it against our citizens, correct?
Well, it says shall, though. I mean, you're an attorney
shall
as well.
not.
There's a big difference between may and shall.
Oh, no, there's no may. It's a
Right,
shall. They
right.
shall not enforce it against the
Shall
citizens
not
of
enforce
Louisiana. Yes.
And it also has to do with registering of guns. That's excluded. But possession, ownership, and transfer. Any federal law on how you can and can't transfer a gun. In Louisiana, you would be able to just say we're not following that. You cannot enforce that federal law in Louisiana.
Any new federal law. Current law applies. Whatever's on the books today is not upset whatsoever. We have to follow it all. We apply it all as written. It's anything that may come down new that would infringe upon our rights and act as a chilling effect on our ability to keep and bear arms or buy ammunition, or the things that we have. I mean, can't have a gun without ammunition.
I guess I just disagree with you saying that it seems to me that we're eliminating the court's review of this. It seems to me that that's what it does. So that's a big concern.
Yeah, I understand. I think we're just going to have to disagree on that one.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Marcel.
Yes. Follow-up question. Representative Marino talked about, or maybe it was Bacala, talking about the overreach of the federal government. That's what we're trying to prevent. Would you agree that with many of the mass killings around our nation, that some of these is not rhetoric that is happening because we're, opening up our phones and our televisions every day and we're seeing that, right? And so if the federal government, with your bill, prevent them from, let's just say, people carrying certain types of weapons, the ones that are probably more powerful than our police officers are carrying, if the federal government handed down such a law to ban certain types of weapons, the ones that we see that are where they go into the school and shoot our kids, or into Costco, or into these weapons where they can fire multiple rounds, not to protect yourself, because I agree that we should be able to protect ourselves, but I don't know if anybody who would need these types of weapons to protect themselves unless they were going to war. And so if the federal government were to hand down such a law that banned those types of weapons, would this then say that our police officers couldn't take those weapons off the street?
Yes, I do believe it says that. Yes.
And that's where I fundamentally disagree, because we do need to be able to protect our children in school, our people in churches, our worship places, and we've seen this happen. And so I don't want to take a person's ability to protect their families and their homes. However, I've never understood why we would not ban weapons that are stronger than, and like we're going to war and against the police and our citizens. And I've just fundamentally disagree with that concept.
I appreciate that, Representative Marcel, and protecting our students in schools. We've now started adding resource officers who are armed. Churches have now started allowing parishioners to carry inside the church concealed to protect their parishioners. So clearly we have taken steps in the right direction to protect those folks, and it's the utilization of weapons to do so.
And let me just say this, and I'll be finished. Right now, if I had a gun that carried 100 rounds or whatever, and everybody in here is a concealed carry permit, and I pulled it out, by the time I got through firing, you all wouldn't even be able to get to your weapons. I'm talking about a certain type of weapon, right? By the time I got through,
I think you got some opposition to Representative Marcel. I saw a couple people like.
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, these things happen, and it's very serious to me in a split second. People don't have yes, you have an officer on duty with he's not carrying an AK-47. He has a pistol. Mm-hmm. He's not carrying that type of weapon. And I'm talking about specifically those types of weapons, if they were to ban those. That's all I'm focusing on at this point in your bill.
I understand.
Even though there are other things that concern me, but that really concerns me, and I'll yield my questions, and thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Representative Frieman, I know that that there are some like under federal law, like if there's something in the middle district and someone is they're precluded from carrying a firearm, how would this impact? Because if they're precluded because of federal law, how are we going to be able to enforce that in the state if your bill passes?
If it's currently in the law, yes.
Okay.
Currently, right now, whatever's in the law right now
Okay.
is applicable.
Okay. All right. We do have a few green cards. Dan Zelinka again. And we'll go with Dan and Everett. You want to speak on this one? Okay.
I'll try to be brief. My name's Dan Zelenka, and I'm the president of the Louisiana Shooting Association. The current federal administration, including the President of the United States, is the most openly hostile administration to the right to keep and bear arms in the history of the United States. President Biden has described gun manufacturers as the enemy. He has nominated David Chipman, an advisor for the Giffords Gun Control Group, as the director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which is the government agency that regulates firearms manufacture and use and enforces those regulations. President Biden announced Chipman's nomination on the same day he unveiled a half dozen executive actions aimed at infringing on Americans' constitutional rights. In addition to the administration, both houses of Congress are controlled by politicians who have espoused major infringements on the right to keep and bear arms. These infringements including banning the most popular firearms in America. In the Heller case, the Supreme Court held that the firearms in common use by citizens for lawful purposes are protected under the Second Amendment. Clearly, the most popular firearm in the United States meets that test, yet it is in danger of being banned. This brings us to HB 118. In 2012, over two-thirds of Louisiana voters approved a constitutional amendment to make Louisiana's constitutional right to keep and bear arms the strongest in the nation. That's Article 1, Section 11. Facing the hostility in Washington to this constitutional right, states and local governments have been passing laws declaring their support and outlawing cooperation in enforcing these threatened new federal regulations and laws. House Bill 118 provides that state funds will not be used for the enforcement of federal firearms laws that violate constitutional rights. The bill further provides that state agencies will not participate in the enforcement of these laws and executive orders. The bill does not nullify federal laws or prevent the federal government from enforcing them. Likewise, it doesn't prevent the state from passing laws and enforcing those. Whether enacting House Bill 118 is merely a political gesture or not, I believe it is important because it lets the Biden administration and his allies in Congress know that we do not approve of their attempts to infringe on our fundamental constitutional rights. Please vote yes on 118.
Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. My name is Everett Bodion. I'm an attorney in Baton Rouge. I'm also a concealed handgun permit instructor. I'm a member of the Firearm Professionals of Louisiana. I'm also a member of the Libertarian Party of Louisiana. And I'm here to support House Bill 118 because I do believe that bills like this are a path toward a better future, not just on this issue, but on many issues. This bill, again, as has already been stated, this gives Louisiana more local control over what our policies are going to be regarding guns. Nothing about this bill prevents Louisiana from passing laws consistent with our own state constitution on the issue. And I think Americans are moving more and more in that direction. I think we are getting more and more tired of the divisive nature of our federal politics because it's difficult for people to accept one set of rules for every single state in the country, which people in different parts of the country have different priorities. And I think a great example of this is what this body did just yesterday, because yesterday this committee passed a bill for legalizing recreational marijuana use, which, as everyone knows, remains illegal under federal law. So any concern that we are going to be deviating from federal law on something is a bit unfounded. To specifically address Representative Marcell's concerns, Representative Marcell, you were a co-author of the marijuana legalization bill. So if we are going to abrogate from federal law on one issue, I think it's important for the sake of consistency that we're going to be willing to do that on other issues if we believe that is better for the citizens of Louisiana. Because as you said, Representative Marcell, what if the federal government wants to regulate something that could potentially harm our children in schools? I believe that was the very exact grounds for the drug war and making marijuana illegal in the first place. And yet we have now decided for the state of Louisiana that we would like to move away from that top-down federal policy on that issue. And I think it's good if we consider doing that on other constitutional right issues as well. Thank you.
Thank you for making her press her button. Representative Marcell.
Thank you. Let me just say that your analogy of what I said was totally taken out of context, because what I specifically said was the guns, if they were to ban the guns that are killing people, and I don't see where marijuana is killing massive amount of people every day, and that's all I got to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. That went better than expected. Joshua Burnhill. Keith Edwards.
My name is Joshua Barnhill. I'm the Louisiana Director for Gun Owners of America. Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of Representative Frieman's Louisiana Firearm Protection Act. My comments, I guess, will be brief since they've pretty much been covered. But as Representative Bacalus has said, and Dan has said, you know, the recent expansive or extreme overreaches or proposed overreaches by the Biden administration and the House of Representatives, who has passed bills that would create universal background checks and also remove the 3-day limit that an FFL must wait before transferring a firearm. It's not surprising that our members and all gun owners really have no faith in the current Congress or the current federal administration to protect their gun rights. And in response to this, states have been passing these firearm protection acts, also known as Second Amendment sanctuary laws. There are currently 11 states now: Arizona, North Dakota, Montana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, West Virginia, Nebraska, who join Idaho, Kansas, and Wyoming. And additionally, there's several states, including Alabama, Missouri, Texas, and Tennessee, who have Second Amendment sanctuary laws currently moving through the legislature. So if there was ever a time for Louisiana to stand up on behalf of its citizens in defense of our Second Amendment rights, now is the time. So again, I thank Representative Frieman for filing this bill, and Chairman James and the committee for hearing it today. And I ask that you please vote favorably on HB 118. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Keith Edwards. I'm a resident of Gonzales, Center Bacalus District. I'm going to try and just condense all these things, as Representative Bacalus said, for other bills that are coming up before the committee today. One of the things that has occurred to me in the past is that there's any number of high-capacity, semi-automatic, military-style weapons that have been available to the public since the 1930s. The Gun Act of the NFA Act of 1934, when they made fully automatic weapon suppressors and things like that regulated by federal tax requirements and things, were based on crime that was going on because of the gangsters and things like that. In fact, the $200 NFA tax stamp figure was arrived at because that's what the cost of a Thompson machine gun cost at that time. People talk about the mass shootings and things, and I was able to do a little quick research this morning focusing on school shootings and the mass school shootings and such. And I had a bunch of numbers here, but I'm not going to try and burden y'all with that. But in the 1800s, there were 32 school shootings when we had, single action firearms, have to cock the hammer and fire it. They have increased incrementally over the years. And starting in the 1950s, there were 16 school shootings in that whole decade. In the 60s, there were 22. In the 70s, 44. In the 80s, 58. In the 90s, 89. In 2000, decade of 2000, 2009 was 68. That number tripled in the last decade. Guns have always been here. Semi-automatic, high-capacity magazines have been here for 70 plus years. But why have these mass shootings in schools increased? It's not a gun issue, it's a social issue. What has changed in the last 50, 60, 70 years to where we've got 3 times as many school shootings in the last 10 years than the previous 60? And my take in it is, we've lost God. People are not acknowledging God the way they did, the way the founders did. The founders could not have appreciated a godless society, even though some were deists and some were others. So that's my take on it. It's a social issue. It's not a gun issue. People have cited that there's nothing in the Bible about the right to self-protect using a firearm. One member cited Christ stopping Peter in the garden from any further attacks on the Romans and the guards of the Sadducees and Pharisees. But he did also say, if you don't have a sword, take your cloak and buy one or two. So it's not a matter of self-protection against I lost my train of thought there. I apologize. My wife was much better at this. She started the Baton Rouge Tea Party. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. It's a social issue. It's not a God issue. We need to start addressing, parents take responsibility and be adults and stuff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Chris Patron and Paul Glasgow. Mail Lamp, he's didn't provide information. Last two in support.
Hi, I'm Chris Patron, and most of my thunder has already clapped. I do want to add one additional point, and that is that when the federal government does write a rule or law that says that magazines over so capacity are not allowed, that the fact that we in the state of Louisiana have a Constitution, Article 1, Section 11, that says there can be no infringement means that the state can't do it. We still have an obligation to follow the federal law. So this bill does not relieve us of following the individual citizens of following state law. It simply relieves or prohibits the state and all of its agencies from helping the federal government enforce those additional laws. That's all. So that was what the concern was. I just wanted to add that one point, is that we still have an obligation to follow federal law. The citizens do. The state doesn't.
Thank you, sir.
That's it.
Thank you, sir. Oh, okay. Representative Bacala, sorry.
Just trying to make a point. As amended, this bill now does not apply to any current federal law. It applies to any law. Well, it could. It only applies to any executive orders or laws that were passed after January 1st, 2021, of which there are 0. So I think just to be clear, we're not talking. What we're saying is there's enough federal law on the books now, so we're not going to enforce anything more that you do in the future. So I just think we need to be clear that is the amended form of the bill. Right now, this bill does not apply to any federal law on the books today. It applies to future laws that may be enacted, future executive orders that may be enacted, which to me is a big difference. I just want to make that point as you speak to this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. On you, sir.
My name's Paul Glasgow. I'm the host of a television show in Lake Charles called Legally Armed America. We actually, I'm not to tip my own hat here, but we're only beaten by the NFL on Sundays as far as viewership, which that's tough to beat. I'd like to point out a couple of things that most of the folks in here have already covered, so I'm not going to go over all of that. I would like to point out that one of the, obviously the most powerful person in the world right now, which is our President of the United States, has given gun safety advice in the not so distant future. And some of that advice was not to use an AR-15 to defend your home. Instead, to use a shotgun and just shoot through the door, not knowing who was on the other side of the door. I would be willing to bet that every person in this room, and probably including you guys, thinks that that's really bad advice, extremely unsafe and irresponsible. If that wasn't enough, the comment was made that if somebody's breaking into your house, go out on a balcony and shoot your shotgun into the air. Something else that probably no one behind here would ever do. In fact, the type of training that we all require and put on ourselves, whether it's required or not by you guys, is that we make sure that we learn these safety rules and that we're very, very aware of them. And I just feel like whenever we're looking at the person at the top in our country right now, threatening these types of laws that could get pushed down on us in the state of Louisiana, I'm grateful that a bill like this comes up, knowing that those are the kind of people pushing these laws to us, because I clearly hold myself to a much higher standard than shooting a loaded shotgun through a door, not knowing who or what's on the other side of it. And it's very important that I think that we address that, and we have the ability to manage ourselves at a state level and not take those types of directives from the top. I would also like to point out that I think that it's kind of sad that we're at a point where we're worried about passing a law because we're concerned that the tax dollars that we sent from the state of Louisiana go to Washington, D.C., and we're worried about the extortion and the blackmail of the federal government withholding those dollars that are our dollars. The federal government doesn't make anything. They don't sell anything. They take our tax dollars and then give them back to us. And for them to threaten to not give us those tax dollars because we're exercising our 10th Amendment right, to me, is pathetic that we're at that point, that we think that now, that we think that's acceptable. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. We have 2 red cards on Jill Bradford, Moms Demand Action, and Karen White, Louisiana Municipal Association, that our president would like to speak. Ms. Bradford, y'all gonna flip a coin?
Ms. Bradford kindly offered to let me go first, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms.
again. Mr. Chairman, committee members, Karen White, Executive Counsel for the Louisiana Municipal Association. First of all, let me say that listening to the debate this morning has made me smile on an otherwise dark week. A lot of discussion about how there are distinctive needs among states, and there is no one size fits all answer. A lot of talk about preemption, and it makes me smile because I have this conversation all the time about the state preempting local governments. So preemption is no fun. Let's remember what that feels like, please. A couple of points, and there are points that I articulated to Representative Frieman about the bill. Our members have concerns about, and let me say, look, there is no movement among any of our members that I'm aware of to try to do anything that would necessarily run contrary to Representative Freeman's intentions. But if there is, for example, a federal court order, or even a state court order to that matter, that compels some kind of action, we have concerns that in complying with the federal court order that we may lose our state funding and suffer, other civil sanctions. And so we had requested that perhaps that the author consider putting some language in there that says, except for circumstances in which a local government may be under a federal or state court order to act in some particular way. The other concern Representative Marcel already spoke to, which is if there is federal funding at stake, it puts our members in a very bad position where we have to decide, do we run afoul of the federal government and lose that funding, or do we run afoul of the state and lose their funding? So, what is the likelihood of those scenarios? It's all hypothetical at this point, but those are the concerns. And again, we would appreciate the opportunity to continue to work with the author to make it better.
Thank you, Ms. White. Ms. Bradford.
All right. I'm going to try and ignore all the fake data that was shared previous to this. It's too much. But first things first, as the chapter leader volunteer for Moms Demand Action, we don't only care about mass shootings, we care about daily gun violence, suicide, domestic violence, and we're always concerned about laws that impact that. People like to harp on mass shootings and put holes in that data, but there's tons of data around crime and violence. House Bill 118 is a dangerous proposal that would seek to nullify federal gun laws and regulations by declaring any federal action the state finds to infringe on a citizen's rights to keep and bear arms null and void in the state. The state does not have the authority to deem federal law invalid, but this law would prohibit the state and local governments from aiding in the implementation or enforcement of federal gun laws. HB 118 would even allow people to sue law enforcement and other public officials for money damages if they have aided in the enforcement of federal gun laws. Federal and local law enforcement officials frequently collaborate on investigations of gun crime. For example, in gun trafficking cases, law enforcement officers or prosecutors may enlist the aid of federal law enforcement or refer cases to federal prosecutors. HB 118 would expose these officials to the prospect of harassing litigation simply for doing their jobs. House Bill 118 would undermine the rule of law and send a false message to criminals that federal gun laws will not be enforced. The bill includes examples as to what federal acts are nullified, including any registration or tracking of firearms. Federal law currently prohibits the manufacture or possession of new machine guns and requires ones in circulation to be registered. This law can make Louisiana residents believe it is lawful to possess unregistered machine guns in Louisiana, and they would face steep federal criminal penalties if they made that mistake. I understand there was an amendment about changing to the future, and so I'll have to read everything again, but the concerns still remain. Further, there are people who are prohibited from possessing firearms under federal law who are not prohibited under Louisiana state law, including certain felons and people involuntarily committed to psychiatric hospitals. Louisiana does not have the authority to declare these people. I'm sorry, I'm very sensitive to other people talking behind me. Louisiana does not have the authority to declare these people exempt from federal prosecution, but declaring federal gun laws void would encourage people who are prohibited from possessing firearms under federal law to ignore the law and endanger public safety in Louisiana. The bill would also send a confusing message to law-abiding gun owners who may expose themselves to criminal liability. An example, after Kansas passed a nullification bill, 2 Kansas men were prosecuted for illegally making and possessing firearm accessories they falsely believed were exempt from federal regulation. An appeals court rejected their argument that they were protected under Kansas's nullification law. During debates over local sanctuary resolutions in Virginia, emails from one Virginia county showed people believing that the resolutions had swept away all gun laws, and some people who had been convicted of felonies happily declared that they had got their gun rights back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford. We don't have any questions for you. I'll bring up we have State Police President wish to speak, Lieutenant Jared Sandifer, Connor Junkin, and you two can come down at this time. And we also had Murphy Paul. I don't know if he's still present. We had another 85 green cards in support that did not wish to speak, and 14 red cards in opposition that did not wish to speak. And on House Bill 118, 135 emails in support and 19 emails in opposition. Lieutenant Sander.
Good morning, Mr. Chair,
Good morning.
committee members. Now, as said, I'm Lieutenant Jared Sandifer. I'm a lieutenant with State Police in our Bureau of Criminal Records. Part of my job duties, I oversee our concealed handgun permit unit. So we are here to speak on behalf of that and give information only. We're not on one side of this bill either way or the other, so I just want to clarify that. We did hear the amendments this morning. We did speak with Representative Frieman regarding this bill. I have with me to my left Mr. Connor Junkin. He's our Louisiana State Police legal representative over concealed handgun permit unit, and I think he wanted to bring some things to light regarding this bill.
Yes, good morning, Chairman and committee members. Like Lieutenant Sandifer said, we did speak with Mr. Frieman, and we appreciate the taking our concerns into consideration with the amendments. I did have a chance to briefly review the amendments made, and I do believe they address kind of some of the things that the Louisiana State Police Concealed Handgun Permit Unit was concerned with, namely the enforcement of any laws that are presently on the books, which he said, as he made the amendment, would still remain the case. And our concern there is because the Louisiana State Police Concealed Handgun Unit does take into consideration specifically 18 U.S.C. 922 G and N. Those are disqualifiers. Those are the federal disqualifiers for possession of a firearm, and it also during the concealed handgun permit application process, those are considered when someone's going through the background check process. So without being able to enforce those, we would be running agrounds of completing that complete background check if we were prohibited from enforcing that. But as I said, his amendment saying that any laws that are presently on the books, or more specifically his amendment saying anything after that specific date from which it would be enforced, that does fix that issue for the present time. However, there could potentially be some concern if federal laws expanding perhaps 922G and N, if those were expanded in the future by the federal government, Louisiana State Police, when reviewing these permits, would still be required to enforce those. So we'd be kind of in a crossfire with enforcing this current law and enforcing the federal law. But as far as how that would impact the particular process and particularly any interaction with federal information systems that are required for access, that would be more of questions for Lieutenant Sandifer.
So like Mr. Junkin said, Louisiana State Police and the state of Louisiana, we are a NICS compliant state. That's the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, part of what we use for background checks for permits. So like Mr. Junkin said, there's a possibility that if we were to issue permits to people and they have those certain federal prohibitors, we might start running afoul of NICS and possibly lose our NICS compliance. And in turn, we might also lose out on some possible grant funding opportunities, which we do get through NICS.
And you have an idea of how much you guys get through NICS yearly?
No, I do not know yearly. I can tell you one example right now that we have going on. We did get, because we are NICS compliant, we're actually received grant funding in the amount of $400,000 approximately to upgrade our current CHP database system. So that's just an example of that. But I do not have a figure of how much that would be. So.
Okay. Thank you. We don't have any questions for you guys, so thank you for the information. Chief Paul, I do see him. Can you guys ask if he still wants to speak on this one? Okay. He waves. Thank you, Chief. All right, Representative Frieman, to close on your bill. And I have a question before you close, if you don't mind. Did you have conversations with any? Because I'm concerned about just the part that says that I'm surprised that I hadn't heard an overwhelming concern from law enforcement about the part that in your bill will allow them to be sued. Have you had any conversations, or just have you heard any concerns from them on that?
I have not heard one law enforcement agency of any level complain about any of this bill to me, other than what we talked about at the state police, and that was merely for the concealed carry issue.
All right. Well, I hope that they don't have issues when we talk about qualified immunity. So if they don't have issue being sued for following the federal law, I hope they don't have issues when the officers are sued when they kill people. So it will be noted that none of them were concerned about being sued today. On your closing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Really, the seminal question is, do we have enough laws on the books at the federal level? And my answer to that question, I believe, is yes. And any further infringements upon our rights need to be taken care of at the state level, and that's exactly what this bill does. This bill does not prevent federal and state agencies investigating gun issues. It doesn't prevent, it doesn't say that you can now use machine guns. It doesn't say that anything that's currently prohibited by the federal government is not prohibited now. What's in place today remains in place. It's anything that's passed in the future that further infringes, further takes rights from us. That's what this bill will address. And I'm glad, I'm really appreciate the state police coming to testify today. I did hear them. I understood their concerns. I tried to alleviate that, and I think you heard them say that this bill does alleviate their current problem. Now, what may happen in the future, we don't know, but it does not affect their NICS compliance as we sit here today. So again, I ask for favorable passage, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. And from the Louisiana Municipal Association, I'm sure you commit to working and having conversations with them as well.
Yes, I will work with anybody and try to fix it.
Sounds good. Thank you. I don't even remember who made the motion. Was it Bacala? Representative Seabaugh has made a motion to report the bill favorable as amended. Is there any opposition? Representative Marino objects. Madam Secretary, call the roll.
Representative Bacala? Yes. Yes. Representative Bryant? Representative Fontenot?
Yes. He said no.
Representative Bryant was a no, and Rep. Fontenot was a yes. Representative Gudo? Yes. Representative Jones? No. Representative Marcel? No. Representative Marino? No. Representative McKnight? Yes. Representative Mascarello? Yes. Representative Nelson? Yes. Representative Seabaugh? Yes. Representative Villio? Yes. 8 yeas, 4 nays.
8 yeas, 4 nays. The bill, House Bill 118, is reported favorable as amended. Next up, Representative McCormick.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.